This has got to be Andrew Vaughn's final opportunity to be more than a replacement level player. Let's discuss why next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fan Side of the Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the team decided to tender Andrew Vaughn a contract, so let's discuss in the first segment why this must be his final shot at stardom on the South Side. Then, this is a monumental rebuild for the White Sox, and I discussed how long monumental rebuilds can take with Locked On Brewers host Chuck Freimund. We went over how Milwaukee went through a major one and a quick one. And then finally, let's do a minor league Monday review, and I want to finish the team's top 10 prospects review with a recap of number 7 prospect George Wolkow's season. And you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So I make no bones about it. I lobbied for Andrew Vaughn to be non-tendered on this show. I obviously didn't call GM Chris Getz, but if I did have his number, I would say, look, he's a minus 0.4 F4 career player in 4 seasons too. After 4 seasons, that's a body of work to show you he's nothing more than a replacement level baseball player. He's nothing more than what his floor says he is, and that is a replacement level baseball player. But you shouldn't be then paying $6 million that is he's projected to get in arbitration. That's way too much, especially for a team claiming poverty. And I don't care if he's 26, because he's only under team control for one more season after this season. So you can just throw out, and I've heard the Vaughn truthers telling me, well, hey, he's still 26. There's still something there where Patrick Wisdom is 33 and, Josh Bell is also, 32. That's great. But also when you look at the control, Andrew Vaughn is only under team control after, 2026. And that's it. He's a free agency. He's a free agent. He can walk after 2026. So you're going to lose him for possibly nothing anyway, because right now he's putting up similar production to Josh Bell. And Bell was traded for a player to be named later in cash considerations. Now, granted, that's one of the favorite returns of a certain owner of this team. But right, for a guy who's 26, you should be getting more than a player to be named later in cash considerations. Although, obviously, if your Getz on the other side of the phone, you could say, well, he's still 26. There's still maybe something there. So maybe you're going to get an actual fringe prospect instead of the player to be named later. But there's just not a whole lot there right now with Andrew Vaughn. But here are the Sox trying to see if Vaughn can finally become something replacement level yet again. And if it doesn't happen this season, then that has to be it. You got to pull the plug. You cannot tender on my contract next season. Because if he produces another 246, 297, 402 slash line, and that where he also struggles to start the season, because, are people forgetting just how much him and Andrew Benintendi's struggles put the team on pace to lose 121 games? Yes, there were the injuries to Yohan Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, and Luis Robert Jr. that sapped a lot of the firepower in the lineup. But Andrew Vaughn not being able to pick up any of the slack really killed the lineup and really put the Sox into that major, major hole that ended in a historic losing season. So, obviously, if he puts another season like this in 5 years, no brainer. You got to non-tender him. Because the White Sox are running out of excuses to keep him. They keep Vaughn at a projected $6 million, yet they're giving up on Gavin Sheets. And I'm all for giving up on Gavin Sheets too, but he would have been $4 million cheaper, and he gets left-handed to balance out the order. So you could put him at first base at least. But no, the Sox obviously pulled the plug on Gavin Sheets. They decided, no, we're done with this. Gavin Sheets is nothing more than a fringe bench player. He might get another opportunity, but he's a 4A player. And Andrew Vaughn, you can say, well, he was a top 5 pick. Well, Andrew Vaughn, if you look at his numbers, and remember, I was banging the drum that he's going to make an all-star team this year. in 2024 and know this isn't, being jilted by that forecast. It's just my eyes have seen that this is a guy who's also a replacement level player. He's just a step above Gavin Sheets. That's it. But you're willing to move on from Gavin Sheets. You could have done the same with Vaughn. But this has got to be the final season. The final countdown. Sorry. But this has got to be it for Vaughn to prove that he can be a 2.0 F4, a 2 F4 player or better. And if not, it's time to move on. Because then he's just going to represent another player from last decade's rebuild who failed to reach his potential. And that was the thing. The Brewer, the previous rebuild under the previous administration, got a lot of guys with high ceilings from other teams, except for Andrew Vaughn. Andrew Vaughn was one of the few players that they actually took that had a high ceiling. And he has just been nothing more than a replacement level player. Although at least the Sox were able to get something from Nick Madrigal. Good Lord, that was a terrible, terrible pick because the Cubs non-tendered him. And that Craig Kimbrell trade worked out for no one. But think about that. The Sox took Nick Madrigal and Andrew Vaughn during their tanking seasons. They didn't end up with a Chris Bryant or Kyle Schwarber. They ended up with a guy that they ended up trading away because he was nothing more than a floor player. Nick Madrigal was a contact hitter. That's all he was. That shows you again, why are the White Sox in their current state? Because the previous rebuild couldn't draft well. But the latest excuse to bring back Vaughn is give new director of hitting Ryan Fuller a chance to unlock him. And I'll admit, it's not a crazy idea. Fuller helped Ryan O'Hearn become an over 115 WRC plus hitter the past 2 seasons in Baltimore. So I get the logic. That's why my stance is this is it. Because O'Hearn, he had been a minus F4 player in 4 of his 5 seasons in Kansas City. And the Royals got so tired with him that they DFA'd him after the 2022 season. Even the Baltimore Orioles DFA'd him 2 days later after trading him for cash considerations. They obviously saw something in him, but they didn't really want him on the 40-man roster. So they DFA'd him. And he ends up accepting the outright assignment to AAA. He still got an invite to big league camp, and he was still cut. But however, Fuller and his co-hitting coaches in Baltimore had a plan to finally unlock O'Hearn. And it worked. And maybe Fuller can do the same for Vaughn. So here's an excerpt on the details of how Fuller fixed O'Hearn. I pulled this from The Athletic. Here's an expert. They fixed his posture first, eliminating the hunching that allowed him to drive the ball to left field really well, but exposed him with anything inside. He started hitting balls on backspin to right field. They worked with him on understanding how to hit breaking balls better in the air and not pounded into the ground. The first 10 pitches of every session O'Hearn does are in the top of the zone to keep him upright. The next 10, he brings the barrel of the bat to his front knee, taps it, and then assumes his stance. These are what Fuller calls his daily vitamins, a way to keep O'Hearn from getting out of sync and falling back into old habits. He'd always hit the ball hard. O'Hearn has a top exit velocity on the team outside of Henderson, but now he was becoming a more well-rounded threat. The other thing the piece points out is Fuller used text messaging to give players information such as their swinging score. The Orioles developed the swinging score metric, but they kept printing it out, even at AA, putting on the players' chairs, and the players would look at it and throw it away because Fuller recognized that this generation loves being on their phones. So send them the video clips of their swings and the reports on something that they'll read. And guess what? It worked. So maybe simple fixes might work for Vaughn. Because what he does have to do is he's got to start pulling the ball more consistently. I know CHGO's Sean Anderson pointed that out when I was listening to their podcast, and I fully agree. Because when he pulls the ball, his average is 385 with a 682 career slugging percentage. So if he's pulling the ball for a righty, keep pulling the ball. So you got to find a way to get that swing to harness to keep pulling the ball more. Also, Fuller wants guys to control the strike zone. And Vaughn's best career slugging percentage is a 1-0 count. His career slugging percentage when the count is 1-0 is 744. 2-0 count, it's 646. 2-1 count, 573. 3-0 count, 571. And 3-1, 529. So it's really finding a way to get Vaughn to continue to pull the ball work the count to his favor. And if it's against him, like an 0-2 count, where his average is 171 with a 270 slug, or a 1-2 count, 176 average, and a 268 slug, just figure out a swing to get the ball in play then in those instances. I mean, Andrew Vaughn is not very good when the pitcher gets ahead of him. So you got to figure out, how do you get him to, because again, Fuller wants guys to drive the ball, control the strike zone. How can you help him get the count back in his favor? Because even a full count, he does have a 366 on base percentage. So how do you work it to get either a walk? That's what I would be kind of tutoring Andrew Vaughn to do when you look at the data and analytics. Because I also think maybe the data and analytics, if all this research and revamping of the front office, if you have good data analytics to show Vaughn, look, obviously it's hard to, if you got a pitcher throwing first pitch for strike, yes, that's sometimes out of your control. Or you see a pitch and you miss it, you foul it off. But you got to try to get the count in your favor. If you get it in your favor, you are a much better hitter, and you are actually a beyond replacement level player if you're driving and pulling the ball. So, but if that doesn't happen, if this doesn't work, if this doesn't work out where you're not building up his value, because you're going to have to trade him, because I doubt the Sox are going to extend him. Although it wouldn't shock me, because if he does to turn into an all-star player this year, they're going to double down and say, see, we were right. But if it doesn't happen, then you got to move on, and you're going to have to move on for him for nothing. Well, this current White Sox rebuild is going to be monumental after the team hit the rock bottoms of rock bottom. And I want to tap into other teams who hit a bottom and how long it took to get back to being competitive. So I sat down with Locked On Brewers host Chuck Freimund to go over the Brewers rebuild in the 2000s and then their quick rebuild last decade. And that is next on Locked On White Sox. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 with promo code MLB. With 5 generations of experience, Omaha Steaks consistently delivers the world's best steak experience, and their gifting experts have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code MLB and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at Omaha, O-M-A-H-A, Omaha, omahasteaks.com, and an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. Minimum purchase may apply. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so during the offseason, I plan on getting guests to talk about successful major rebuilds other MLB teams went through after hitting rock bottom. Because remember, you could say, well, Todd, the Sox went through a rebuild last decade. We know what it's like. Well, we went through a rebuild because the team didn't really actually hit rock bottom, like losing 100-plus games 2 years in a row, or obviously just losing a franchise record. The team during last decade just stopped having winning seasons. And the decision was, hey, let's tank. Let's copy what the Cubs are doing and the Astros are doing. And for a brief period, it worked. But as I talked about in the last segment, they didn't draft well. They didn't draft enough to keep sustaining. And then they had injury problems, and they hired Tony La Russa. And it's been well documented on the show, just how this team decayed so quickly. So I want to tap into teams such as the Detroit Tigers, the Baltimore Orioles, and the Milwaukee Brewers to go over those hitting absolute bottoms. Those are clubs that hit bottoms. Now you could say, well, Baltimore tanked, but they also hit bottom under Buck Showalter. So I want to go over that and how these clubs eventually bounce back. So I sat down with Locked On Brewers host Chuck Freimund, who was there for when the Brewers crashed to 106 losses in 2002. And then, a few later, it got to the playoffs.
All right, so Chuck, the Brewers lost 106 games in 2002. Complete dysfunction. They're firing their manager. You got the interim manager getting yelled at by Paul DeYoung on the mound. how the heck did the Crew get back to 500 in just 3 seasons later and then get to the playoffs in 2008?
Well, I remember after that season, the C League sent out a memo apologizing the day after how badly things were. And I saw something similar when I saw management of the White Sox did something after the season ended this past year, right? Am I got that right? Yeah. I saw, and it reminded me of when Wendy Seelig apologized to Brewers fans, how embarrassing of a season it was. And there was nowhere to go but up from then. And the Brewers did. They hired Ned Yost. Doug Melvin eventually became the general manager. And there was new ownership, Mark Attanasio. There was just a fresh life into this. And it kind of started with Prince Fielder and Ricky Weeks drafting high and drafting those two, and then the Corey Harts and all that. But those two were kind of the backbones. The turnaround didn't really, you saw a glimpse of it in 2004, 2005, some more. Brewer fans started thinking, okay, we got something good here, starting with young players. And then they didn't make the postseason to 2008. So it still took like 3 or 4 or 5 seasons, 6 seasons before things really got right. It didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, and it also happened because you had a guy like Doug Melvin then who even was able to get guys, even off the scrap heap that were at least worth watching. Like, you don't get Carlos Lee without finding Scott Podsednik off the scrap heap. Yeah.
And Scott Podsednik, who later played for the White Sox, he was good in his year here. And Carlos Lee, Ocaballo, he was terrific. Fans loved him. But yeah, he made a couple of trades. Eventually got CC in 2008 that put him over the hump. But the Brewers, not only that 100-loss season, but there were seasons before that. The Brewers have been one of the more frustrating franchises in baseball history. They don't have a World Series championship. They don't have. They got one World Series appearance. So even before that 100-loss season, there were several dreadful years. They went 26 years without making the postseason, even with expanded postseason coming in I believe 96 or 97. So dreadful baseball, and it's easy to get caught up into that. I think a lot of it had to do financial. Now I don't know what the resources are for the White Sox, but I would think living in Chicago, being in a big Chicago market, there's an ability to spend more than the Milwaukee Brewers and their $100 million payroll. They've been consistent, the Brewers have, in the last few years, but there was a time when it was just dreadful baseball.
Yeah, wasn't it 13 seasons where they finished under 500, like 13 straight? I remember 2005 when I was working at the ballpark and covering the team. Like, that was a cause for celebration. And I remember like Chad Moeller being like, "I want to make the playoffs," and everybody was like, I remember talking to the clubhouse, and everybody was like, "Dude, just celebrate this." Like 81 and 81 was considered a triumph. The Sox financial situation, though, is almost strikingly similar to what the Seeligs were in that it seems like almost Jerry Reinsdorf isn't rich enough to own the team anymore. Now, granted, he's worth $2 billion, but a lot of that's in the Bulls and the Sox, actually their value. Mm-hmm. And they're just not spending. They just said Austin Slater was one of their top targets, and they just gave him a $1.75 million deal. With the Sox cutting payroll, especially being this historically bad, does this sound a lot like the Seeligs toward the end of their run?
It did, because in the 90s, and salary was a little different there. If they signed somebody for $5 million a year, that was like, wow, really? Like Hideo Nomo, they got off the scrap heap, and he came in here and was productive for like the year he was here, and that's who they would get. They didn't have the ability to go out and sign. They still don't. They today they have no shot at an Alex Bregman, even though I'd love to see that. Yeah, the spending, but I don't know. But I could never understand that with the White Sox. I could never understand, even the Cubs. I don't know, understand. I'm glad they don't spend more, but the White Sox, we're talking a major market here, Chicago. How come they're not spending more money? We all remember the 2005 team. That was a fun team to watch, but how come there hasn't been any success since then?
Because they've been operating like it's 2005. I mean, The one thing that, a lot of Brewers fans, they keep cursing Attanasio about not being able to spend money. At least he's been embracing how you should be spending money in a small market, embracing the analytics, embracing the data. The White Sox just had to rename their department, research and development or whatever, R&D, just to make it more palatable to Jerry to actually embrace analytics, because he's been operating, back in he was saying Branch Rickey, if he could get Branch Rickey to be the GM in today's day and age, he would. I mean, that's just how far behind the times they are, where you look at the Brewers, especially once Atanasio came in, it seemed like he just breathed new life into the franchise, where now it's just complaining he's not pushing all his chips into the center, correct?
He did breathe new life. Now, my complaint is, how come the Brewers are only spending $100 million when St. Louis down the road is at 160? I don't see much of a difference in the market size. So the Brewers are still doing it economically. They're filling up the place. The Brewers are, for weekend games and, for weekday afternoon games. They draw well. The TV contract really isn't that. I think that's the biggest difference. I would like to see what, and you would probably know more about this, the White Sox TV contract as opposed to what the Brewers get for a TV contract, which is going to take a dip here because Bally Sports isn't associated with them anymore.
Yeah, so to provide that to the Milwaukee right now, the Sox are actually almost going to be claiming poverty technically for a big market team, because they just created their own sports network, Chicago Sports Network, and the cable grift is dead. Like, that's the problem, So for like the Brewers and even the White Sox, they need to be looking forward to 2028, when hopefully Rob Manfred, his last decent act that he'll ever do, his only decent act is to cobble up all 30 teams as local contracts and sell that nationally, because that's what's happening right now to the White Sox. They're not on Comcast right now. That's the 50%, largest provider, or the largest cable provider in Chicago. 50% of the audience has that. They're trying the over-the-air option, which the signal is terrible. They're what is it? They just launched their own direct-to-consumer, which is $19.99 for one team. You probably would know in Milwaukee, you could have gotten $19.99 when the Brewers were still on with Bailey. You could have gotten the Bucks that won a championship. It's either $19.99 for one team or $29.99 for the Brewers. For the Blackhawks, Bulls, and White Sox. So that's the other reason why the Sox are cutting back on payroll is they don't know what their revenue streams are going to look like, because also NBC, who now they're arguing with to get onto Comcast, pulled out of the, basically gave them the hint that we're not getting in the RSN business anymore because the cable grift is over. That's the biggest thing.
And it sounds a little bit like Milwaukee in a sense where, we're trying to figure out where the TV money is going to come from. But that shouldn't happen in Chicago. There should be a TV that surprises me. Mm-hmm. And I know the White Sox haven't been very attractive lately, but that's not, they're not going to win 40 games for the next couple of seasons. There's some, I looked at the White Sox this past year, man. They got some guys. There's some individuals on that team who can play. There's some guys on that team who can play. But I think in Chicago, it was done in the past and it could happen again. I think they have a shot at getting back to it, and it might not happen overnight. It never does, especially their climb. But what they needed to do, I thought, is just clean house and bring in some fresh blood, and maybe they need fresh ownership too. And like you said, with Mark Antanasio, I thought that the Brewers at that time needed fresh ownership, because Seelig was as good a commissioner as he was a little dated as an owner. And but as an owner today, doesn't have the pockets to fit in. Even though this Brewers team franchise doesn't spend a lot of money, Seelig, and maybe the White Sox need to do the same thing with Reinsdorf.
Yeah, that's the hope. They're hoping that he sells. And the other thing is maybe could it potentially, the Brewers do bottom out again in 2015. They lost 94 games. They make a couple of shrewd trades, Doug Melvin on his way out the door, and then they bring in David Stearns. They got it turned around within 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Draft picks, good draft picks will help that. Younger players, you need to do that. You're not going to go out and make some blockbuster trades or sign some big free agents if you're the Milwaukee Brewers. But you don't have to be bad for long. You're not going to turn into a World Series champion overnight, but you don't have to be bad for it's possible to draft and develop players and win and maybe struggle with the younger guys. And this is where the problem is. I like during the trading deadline, I heard the White Sox, they want to trade this young guy and this guy, young guy, and all that. It's like, man, why don't they keep those young guys? They're good players. Build with those guys.
No, I fully agree that, I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of what the Brewers have done. They keep the guys up until just before they either have to get rid of them, like
Yeah.
Josh Hader, even though it sunk the
Yeah.
2022 season. But on the flip side, they're not afraid to let a guy walk, like, say, how they let Prince Fielder walk for nothing. And they're going to let Willie Adames walk for nothing.
I
Sometimes
just
you got to push your chips to the center.
I just looked at the White Sox as being kind of a sleeping giant. You know what I kind of mean on that, Todd? I just think
Mhm.
there's something there with the White Sox where they could turn it around, just like the Milwaukee Brewers have. The Brewers have won a World's. They can't get by the first round of the playoffs, but at least right now they own the NL Central for the time being. And I think that the White Sox in that division, the American League Central, even though Cleveland won it this past year, and the Twins are good, but they can make a move in that division.
Yeah, I mean that's why I wanted to bring you on just to kind
Yeah,
of show the parallels. How did the
sure.
Brewers do it? The Brewers, because the Brewers bottomed out in 106 losses. They bottomed out again in that, and then they're bringing in Walker McKinvin. I always keep
Yeah.
getting that. Uh, you familiar with him? I know you cover the team regularly for AP Radio. If you got to know him, and what could he bring to the team?
Well, he their coordinator on run prevention, and that's a title that maybe wasn't around in 2005. But what he does is he helps, just like what the title says, run prevention with the Milwaukee Brewers, align defenses, works with the catching department, um, preventing runs, preventing the other teams. What can we do to prevent the other team from putting up runs against us defensively in certain things? He was an up and comer in the Brewers organization, so he's a good guy to have. And a guy like that is not going to stay around because there's other coaches ahead of him on the staff. So he was not going to move up here. But this is what the White Sox need to do: bring in people from other staffs in other organizations who've been successful before, and that's what I think they're doing here.
Well, it's Monday, so that means a minor league Monday review of the Sox top 30 prospects. Going to finish the team's top 10 prospects by recapping what number 7 prospect George Wolkow did next on Locked On White Sox. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And I always maintain FanDuel's spreads, over, under, and money lines are fun to play. But if you want to win big or at least double your money, FanDuel's parlays, props, and futures is the way to go. Popular parlay for tonight's game is J.K. Dobbins, Ladd McConkey, Lamar Jackson, and Derrick Henry all scoring an anytime touchdown. It is at plus 2,612. And if that hits and you put, say, $10 on it, you can win $261.27. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all my everydayers. Appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Hope you had a great weekend. I know the Bears result had me very sad at the end of the weekend. Otherwise, mine was low-key. Hopefully you had a much more enjoyable weekend. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans friends to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. And hey, if you got a chance, I'd really appreciate a 5-star review. All right, so George Wolkow has a chance to be the next great power hitter the White Sox have. And the thing is, it's just going to be a while before he makes his big league debut. Like maybe 2027, as that is when MLB Pipeline projects the 18-year-old left-hander, the 18-year-old left-handed masher to make it to the South Side. He also represents the Sox finally stealing a first-round pick when he reclassified to be draft eligible in 2023. And the Sox ended up taking him in the 7th round. They gave him $1 million signing bonus, so they overslotted him to make sure that they could get a first-round talent in the 7th round and for a little bit less, because he was projected, if he had stayed in high school and not reclassified, he would have been eligible. He probably would have been a first-round pick this year. Instead, the Sox monitor him because he's from Downers Grove South. I believe that's where I read that he's from. They monitor him. They see that he classifies into the 2023 draft, and they jump on the chance to get him in the 7th round. The young man has a 6'7", 239-pound frame. They keep saying he's built like a tight end. Who's the last White Sox hitter that was built like a tight end that ended up having a Hall of Fame career? Oh, that's right, Frank Thomas. Now, I'm not saying George Wolkow will be like Frank Thomas, but both are very big human beings who can hit the ball a country mile. And he might finally be the long-term solution to solving the White Sox eternal problem in right field. That's if he can cut down. That's if he can cut down on his strikeouts. He struck out 132 times in 76 games at low A ball. Now, the strikeouts don't bother me, as that's a data point you and I can use to track his progress. That's what I'm going to be looking at. Can he cut down on his strikeouts as he keeps progressing up the Sox system? If he's cutting down on the Ks, you know the teaching is working. But the young man has plenty of power. He hit 11 home runs in Kannapolis after impressing in the complex league to the point that the club had no choice but to send him to low A. Like, I think the plan was keep him in the complex league as long as they could and maybe send him to Kannapolis in, say, August. But he was raking down in Arizona that they had no choice. They had to send him to low A. And he had a 241, 342, 428 slash line in Kannapolis. And I'm not going to argue, I would argue that is darn good numbers considering he would have been drafted this year. This would have technically been him going to the complex league like number 10 prospect Caleb Bonemer and just playing in exhibition games. Because that's why I'm not recapping Caleb Bonemer, the other positional player that is in the top 10, because he just played in the exhibition games. There's your recap. They're working, they're getting him adjusted to the big league game. They're teaching him all the stuff that, what they're trying to do with the minor leagues now. That's it. But Wolkow is out there crushing the ball. And he's got a ringing endorsement from Hall of Famer Jim Thome. This is from MLB.com, Scott Merkin. This is what he wrote last month. Thome likes Wolkow, the massive left-handed slugging outfielder, and likes Wolkow, the individual, just as much, but understands he needs time to grow. Quote, he has to go play, Thome said. He's just got to get the at-bats. He just turned 18 in January, and it's just great that he's going to get that opportunity at such a young age to develop in being in pro ball and go through the things now that he will learn as he goes. We observe him, we watch him as an organization, and then the game plan every day is to help him. That's the watching aspect of just seeing how he progresses. He's special. He's got the size. He's got the tools. As I said, he's a wonderful kid. He's got a great personality, and how he treats people is the thing for me that really stands out, end quote. Now, how he hits the baseball very far is also another thing that stands out for me. That's me editorializing there. But this is also an example of why you have guys like Jim Thome still involved in the organization when he wants to be. This is why you get, these guys to be ambassadors, your former greats, and you ask them to come to spring training and maybe you pay for a ticket for a game or two to go to Kannapolis and just be like, can you watch him in the cage? Because if George Wolkow ends up being like Jim Thome and, hey, left-handed power bat, granted in the outfield, things worked out really well for Jim Thome. And I would like, maybe him to kind of give him some pointers and some tips. And that's the thing. And I do want Fuller to work with Wolkow on cutting down those Ks and, making sure we can start controlling the strike zone, that type of stuff. My only fear is does Fuller look at him and be like, this guy can't control the strike zone. I can't work with him. Then you got a problem. But I hope Fuller comes in with an open mind, gets him to understand how the strike zone works, to control it, and to keep driving the ball. Because if he wasn't whiffing so much, he probably would have posted some better traditional numbers. His best month was in July when he had a 280, 396, 533 slash line. Slowed down in August and September, but I keep getting excited about his potential of getting to the south side by his 21st or 22nd birthday and just crushing the ball deep. This is a guy that you got to be excited. He's one of those bats that they have that projects to be an impact bat. It's just he's 18 years old, so you got to wait. His next test obviously would be cutting down on the Ks, but also can he keep producing at high A? Because you see a lot of guys, they produce at low A, and then, once you get to high A, that's when you start to get rid of some of these more fringe prospects. You start playing with maybe more of your peers, guys that could make it to the big leagues. You don't want him to be like, the Savala kid. You want him to get to Winston-Salem and keep crushing the ball and keep cutting down on the strikeouts. I do think, though, he should stay at Winston-Salem if that's the plan. Maybe they have him start out at Kannapolis again, which can't hurt, but have him, play a full season of A-ball for an entire year because there's no need to fast track him. He's just going to be 19 next season. So, that's the other thing I love about Wolkow. His age gives him the opportunity to be developed correctly. You don't need to rush him. You don't need to be like, hey, let's get him to Winston-Salem. And then if he starts raking, let's move him to Double-A. Let's be patient with him. Let's give him the at-bats now at high A ball. Get him accustomed to that. And then move him up to Double-A, hopefully, if he's producing, when he's 20, and then maybe Triple-A. Don't rush these guys. That's the thing that the previous leadership under Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn kept doing. They kept on being like, ooh, this guy can do something. Let's move him. Let's get him. Let's get him. Let's get him. Let's get him. No, take your time with this guy, young man. Like I said, not going to recap Caleb Boner because he was just drafted and he only played in some exhibition games in the Complex League. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings you a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll be back tomorrow with potential trade packages for Garrett Crochet from FutureSox.net and Just Baseball's Elijah Evans. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding this being the last chance for Andrew Vaughn to be an above replacement level baseball player. An example of how rebuilds take after hitting rock bottom with Locked On Brewers host Chuck Freimund, and a Minor League Monday recap of George Wolkow. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube X, formerly Twitter at Todd J. Dub or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow.